Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? There's quite a few of you on, and it's a minute after. Robert, do you want to do a roll call real quick, and then we'll see if nobody else from EPA joins, we'll move into some other topics.
Okay, we have Jordan Adelson, Richard Burrows, Mike Delaney, Dave Friedman, Jay Gandhi, Kitty Kong, William Lips, Sharon Mertens, Jerry yourself, Sarah Wright, Zach Mandera, Troy Strock, Tarun Animal has just joined, as has Adrian Hanley.
Okay. So we still don't have anybody from drinking water.
Correct.
Sorry. So you want to skip the first two agenda items in case either Dan or
Well, we can go to the initial demonstration capability issue, I think.
okay, and there's
Give them more
Kim.
time to come.
Well, so let's start with the initial demonstration capability. And Adrian, I'm glad you're on here because you can help clarify this as well. Mary Johnson just joined us, and Judy Morgan. Last month, David's turned me for a loop talking about the fact that this initial demonstration and capability, or initial precision and recovery test, IPR, document I wrote up, that since it was 4 tests, that my whole logic of a retest didn't apply because you wouldn't expect the same analyte to fail 4 times. And so I thought about that quite a bit. And then I realized that I think it still does apply because the point is you have to have 4 successful tests, not 3 pass and 1 fail. And that's where the retest came in. That was when 624 and 625, et cetera, were promulgated back in 84, was to ensure that you could go back and retest that individual analyte. So I think that the original document I provided last month is still valid. Adrian, can you respond to that? I know I'm catching you blind because you went on the call.
Yeah, the first part I absolutely agree with. I mean, you have to have 4 successful tests. I know we wrote something in the most recent 608, 624, and 625 about failures in retest because they have such long analyte lists. But I'm actually trying to pull that up right now because I don't remember the exact text off the top of my head.
That's okay because we're working on this was actually a drinking water issue we were working on, and last month we had a lot of discussion about, well, why would you need to do a retest if you have run 4 samples, you statistically wouldn't fail all 4 of them. So, David, does that address your concern?
To me, it's not a big concern. I mean, it's just something I wanted to put on the table. When you're doing, I can see the statistical having acceptances of a certain number of mistakes generally, but in the initial demonstration where you're doing 4 replicates, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the chances of really being out of whack isn't that high, I would think.
But if you fail,
it could be. So
you could if you fail only if you run 4 samples and 1 compound is out in the 4, then you've not passed the test.
If it's far enough out, so the average gets in. So I figured it's not that big a deal, and if everybody else can live with it, especially if the EPA folks can live with it, I don't have a big issue. I don't want to make it an issue.
Let me work on a document that I'll have ready for the next meeting to be able to present this to Dan for the Office of Water.
So Jerry, that was for the initial demonstration of capability. Is there anything like that for the CCV?
Isn't that based on one analysis?
Because I think that's where me and Dave were looking at it. I mean, I did when I was reading it. I wasn't even thinking demonstration of capability, I was thinking CCV because you got 60 compounds. Some of them are going to fail, right?
And that's where I am, William. I was thinking the same thing, but when you're doing 4 of them, it's got one out of the 4 may be really far away, and it would throw off the average far enough to be out of compliance. But I think that language you put in there, Jerry, in the latest version you sent us, alerts people to that if they're seeing that happens, repeated failures of more than like one particular replicate, I think that's covered by that.
This is Adrian. I just pulled up 620. Oh wait, sorry. Where are you? This is Adrian. I just pulled up 624.1 just as an example, which is one of our more recent methods, and they definitely allow a retest if one analyte or so is out. So that seems in line with that. I mean, we're going to default to what's written in one of our more recent methods just about every time.
Right. And Adrian, the issue wasn't with your methods. It had to do with the fact that that provision is not in the drinking water methods. And so we were trying to ask them to allow for the same provision. So that's what we've been working on. So let me come back next month with a concrete proposal on that now that we've talked through it. I see a couple more people have joined. I don't know who KY is. Who's KY?
Kathleen Young.
Okay.
Pat Young from Perkin-Elmer.
Yep.
Okay. And I know.
And Jack Freed from EPA has
I was going to say, Dave, Jack's on now, so why don't we go back to the 200.8 issue?
Hey, Jerry, this is Mike Delaney. Before you go on, were you or anyone able to find the original source for the table of number of parameters that are out?
No, I was going to ask Jordan to do that, and then we decided I didn't need to have Jordan do it, but now I'm going to ask Jordan to go back and try to do it. We all think it comes from Tom Georgian, who's with the Army Corps of Engineers. And it was in both the version 3 of the DoD Quality Systems Manual and the 2003 NELAC standard. I'm not sure how it got there and when it got there, but it was in that time frame. So Jordan, can you go back and reach out to Tom? But I'll send him an email and ask him to do that.
Okay.
Anyway, that was the derivation. So 200.8.
Well, let me, since there's nobody from the Drinking Water Regulatory Program, I'll just quickly do the acrylonitrile holding time study, and then we can come back to 200.8 if it's all right, Jerry.
Okay.
Give them an extra minute or two. Basically, I have not much to say. That work is proceeding. The receipt of the landfill leachate samples that are going to be supplied by EPA, that's been delayed while EPA finishes some QC review of their data. That hopefully will be done soon. And unless Judy or Richard knows of any other issues that have arrived, that any problems their labs have had, I'm not aware of any other problems that are the participating labs are having. Richard, Judy, is there any problems that your labs are having that I'm not aware of?
Not for me. So we're through day 7, and the results are interesting. I could give you a summary if you wanted, or we can keep you in suspense for later.
I think we're all curious.
When you use the word interesting, Richard, that always gets everybody curious.
All right, well, through day 7, so we have a leachate, which I would characterize as a nasty sample, and an effluent, which I would characterize as a fairly mellow sample. And acrylonitrile, for both matrices, all 3 preservation types, have got good recovery through day 7, where I'm defining good as between 80 and 120%. Now, acrolein in the effluent, we have good recovery at pH 2 and good recovery at pH 4 to 5, but in the not unpreserved sample, it fell to 38% by day 3 and is continuing on down. In the leachate sample, acrolein, we saw attenuated recovery even at day 0 for all 3 preservations in the leachate sample. pH 2 was best, which is about 57%, and the no preservation and pH 4 to 5 were both in the 30s. At day 3, pH 2 was still holding in at about 57%. pH 4 to 5 and pH and unpreserved were down to 4 or 5%. And by day 7, they were non-detecting pH 4 to 5 and no preservation, but we still have 50% about in the pH 2. So pH 2 is the best by far.
And of course, in a real sample, you wouldn't know that that was 57%.
Right.
Yes, something happened immediately.
Yeah, I think there was probably something in that leachate that, reacted with some of the acrolein, and then whatever it was used up. That's why it is now stable over the next period.
It'd be interesting to see how the other samples behave.
Yeah, like you say, Richard, interesting data, but promising.
Well, I think, it definitely says to me that pH 2 is best. There's no reason that I can see that pH 2 wouldn't be preferred based on these 2 matrices.
You're gonna have problems, Troy.
Sounds interesting.
You're gonna have to figure out what to do about the landfill leachate analysis. if it's not stable in any case,
Yeah.
very long.
It's not surprising. Wait, it sounds interesting though. Hold any more comments until we get to see more data.
Agree.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
Hey, David, this is Judy. I don't really have an update at this point. The last word that I got was from our lab here in Mount Juliet is that they were, proceeding through the study and were actually going to. I think they actually finished up possibly at the end of last week on day 14. So I'm anxiously awaiting that update and hope to be able to share some additional information.
Great.
Yep, not aware of any problems yet at this point, but that doesn't mean that I just haven't heard. So
I assume they're going to send the data to you first before it's sent on to me.
oh yeah, absolutely, they will.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments about or questions about that study? We're making progress, so very good. All right, switching to 200.8, the EMC task group met and developed a recommendation for approval by the EMC as how they think the program should move forward. Basically, the desire of the EMC is to bring the expertise and resources of the greater monitoring community to bear to assist EPA in moving an updated 200.8 forward. The task group, we had representatives from Eurofins, PerkinElmer, Agilent, Shimadzu, PACE, Michael Flournoy, Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality Laboratory, the South Carolina State Laboratory, Thermo Fisher, and Thermo Fisher in the task group. So It went very well. What the recommendation is that the current EMC task group would be expanded to include representatives from EPA's Office of Research and Development, Jack Reed, and the Office of the Drinking Water, and possibly the regional laboratories, EPA regional labs, that EPA would share with the task group its latest draft of an updated 200.8 and brief the EMC on any issues that they see that remain to be addressed. Then the task group would identify any additional issues that they might see with the draft and provide that guidance to EPA, and also ideas on how the EPA might best address them. And once the draft method is ready, the EMC would help EPA work with ACIL, APHL, ASTM, Board of Environment Federation, others, whoever other appropriate, to validate the method. If I understood what transpired at the meeting, that this is the proposal that we would like to put on the table, both to the EMC and also to our colleagues in EPA. That's a short summary. Questions, comments, thoughts? Anyone?
Well, let me try to kick it off. So if I think we're presenting this to EPA, and so we need to have EPA response. Like I say, the program office isn't there. I don't think Dan's on the call, and so maybe we have to get a response from him. But maybe we could hear from Jack if he's open to collaborating with this group of people, and if so, maybe our team could briefly summarize what comments they have, but then we go away and let them work together on this. So I guess the question is, Jack, what do you think about working with this group of experts that we've pulled together?
I'm perfectly open to work with just about anybody. I think the issue kind of on the table is that collision cell is a great way of getting rid of polyatomics like argon chloride on 75 that interferes with arsenic, or argon sodide at 63 that interferes with copper, and it does a very good job of that. I cannot argue that. But at the same time, what it does is it kind of enhances, or the cost of that polyatomic reduction is that it enhances the response from rare earth plus 2. So you got neodymium at 150, and it produces a plus 2 at 75. So every time you have a sample that has neodymium in it and you start using collision cell, you need to be aware that there's a possibility of there will be a false positive produced at 75 from the neodymium 2 plus. We spent a fair amount of time, I'd say more than most, digging into that and looking into ways to mitigate that situation. We put out one paper basically saying, here's our preliminary results. What we see is that we can use some techniques, and they work really good on some days, and then a week later you can say we ran the exact same samples and you can't get good results. So it's like these things like fixed factors that are commonly used in methods. They will work as long as you don't let the instrument drift too far. You have short analysis periods and you don't have too much matrix. But when you start to challenge it, our experience is that then the wiggle starts to get involved and you don't get the kind of correction that you'd really like. So what we did on our side is we kind of backed away from it. I'm going to say a year and a half ago, we were kind of interacting with the solution vendors trying to say, how can you make this solution? Then we started testing those solutions. We started running into some of the problems that I just highlighted. So what we did is we said, okay, let's think about this a little bit. Let's come up with some different approaches. And basically what we did is we took, this gets pretty long, 12 drinking water samples from across the United States. We took 250 ppm sodium, 250 ppm magnesium, calcium. We did a 0.5% phosphate solution, 0.5% HCl solution, and a sulfate solution. So we kind of varied the matrix a little bit. They were single component matrices. And then we just said, let's take a couple of drinking waters from across the United States. And what we did is we put a fixed amount of neodymium in each. We analyzed them all first to make sure there wasn't any alternative sources of neodymium, and there wasn't. So we spiked neodymium and gadolinium and samarium into them. We then took each one of those samples and had them analyzed by high-res ICP and ICP triple quad. And the rationale behind that was actually the true value. So that's the target. That's what we really like to hit. We like to say in these samples that I just described, day in and day out, we can hit the target, which would be what the triple quad says or what the high resolution instrument says. What you end up with is 8 days worth of data using 2 different tunes, a high helium tune, a low helium tune. I can go into that, but that's getting pretty far into the weeds as to why we chose that. One of these tunes, a high helium tune, tends to be aggravated by the presence of neodymium, so you get a lot more neodymium 2+ transmission in a high helium tune than you do in a low helium tune. We were kind of looking at that as a barometer of how bad the rare earth interference was. On the other side, what we were doing is we were using the OCL from the chloride at mass 51 to look at how well that particular helium flow and or instrument tune was dealing with the polyatomic side. So you have this balancing job, if you will. Should come on here in a minute. So it's kind of a balancing job between what I would call the polyatomic OCL and all the other polyatomics, argon chloride, argon sodide. You have that, which helium helps. And then on the other side, you have this +2, where the helium is actually kind of non-productive. It's actually producing more of an interference on the +2. And what you're doing is you're looking across all these days, 8 different days, looking for an approach that holds you as true as you can possibly get to the values that you're getting for the high resolution and the triple quad. So with that said, what you start doing is you start looking for correlations. Correlations are just telling you what ions move together in a matrix, and then, well, in matrices, okay, during a day, and then across days. So you can imagine you're looking for what ions move across tunes, across days, and across matrices. So you're looking for something that's pretty predictable. It's day in and day out. You're looking for a good, strong correlation. And when you look at that kind of data, what you find is that the +2s, the +2s being the neodymium +2, the gadolinium +2, you can go through the entire rare earths. We did a study on those as well, looking at, do they move together? And the answer is you get a +2 cluster that's really tight across all these instrument parameters, across all these matrices, across all this analysis. And what that tells you is that a +2, any +2, moves the same way as another +2. The problem is that the method doesn't have any +2s as internal standards. So you've got this +2 interference that is changing from matrix today, cross tunes, and other M+2 ions like neodymium or holmium +2. That would be a great internal standard, a great way of predicting how that changes from sample to sample to sample. And that was one approach that we evaluated. Another one was just to use the more conventional scandium, yttrium, the other +1s, the indiums of the world that are in the method itself right now. And what you find is that if you use an M+2 like holmium, you get really tight distributions. So what you do is you correct, and when you correct, you get a very narrow window of error associated with it. But then once you start moving to these +1s like scandium, yttrium, or indium, so you're looking for some correlations, and the correlations become much wider. And so what that happens is the error induced by making the correction becomes larger. So we walked away from that. I think it was a good experience. I actually learned a lot during it about principal component analysis as well as hierarchical modeling. But what you walk away from that is you say, okay, here's the approach, and the approach is, you use the half mass or a +2 as an internal standard. An in-sample, we call an in-sample correction, which is you actually go get the actual neodymium signal, the +2 at a half mass, 71.5. So there's a lot going on here. I agree. I should have had some slides, but anyway, you have the 143 ion up here for neodymium. It produces a +2 at 71.5. What's nice about that is that there's no unit mass interferences at 71.5. So you have a very good measurement of the +2 factor that you can apply. Okay. Then all other techniques have a little bit wider band. So you say in samples got a very tight confidence bound. Then you have the +2s as other internal standards. They're a little wider. And then you have the +1s that are the widest. So you get increased variation with those. So what I did then is I opened the story up, or the audience up, to the regional people. And I said, hey, there's really a couple of different ways of approaching this. One is everybody adjust their instruments so that they have a quadruple resolution of 0.4, do everything at half mass, and do the corrections and hold the confidence bounds as tight as you can. We had done all the homework in terms of saying you can meet a lot of the detection limit requirements at this increased resolution. We kind of looked at that as the best way, the most accurate way, the way that had the best correlation to the high res and the triple quad data. We liked it from an analytical perspective, but the downside was it was going to take, you're going to have to take and reconfigure your instrument, which it's not hard. It's not a difficult task, but it is a little bit of a job. Now, Region 4, who commonly does this correction, has already adopted it. And so that's the way we're going to do it. We had worked with them a little bit and said, we're really looking at this half mass. We think this is the best approach. And given that they have a rare earth problem in Region 4, they said, yeah, we think this is the best approach. We see that 20% of our samples are affected by this rare earth corrections. And I said, yeah, I think that is the best way of doing it. And then Region 10 and I believe Region 5 both chimed in and said, we've been looking at 143 for a while and we haven't seen a whole lot of rare earths. And so why should we have to do all these little extra steps and maybe compromise our sensitivity a little bit? I could go into that with more detail, but I think that's a small cost to pay. But they said, that's a lot of work, and it's not going to really. There's no value added to me because I'm not seeing this rare earth interference. So, I guess in the last month, we've been mining our data with the idea of saying, okay, we're going to try to appease both of these people with one method. And so the Region 4 people, they just want to do an in-sample, and we're totally 100% behind that. We think that's the way to go. But the Region 10 people, what we're thinking about doing is saying, okay, what you do is you run this interference solution, and then I don't want to get into the math associated with this. It's not tricky, but it's something that has to be done, is that you can take, let's just say on January 1st, you determine this estimate for the rare earth correction. Here it is. And then what you can do on day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on out into maybe 3 or 4 months is estimate that correction. I could go into that. I think that just without slides, that would be painful. And so you estimate this correction, and then you apply that correction over that 4-month period, and you do almost nothing different other than to run this tune solution. And in the tune solution, you're basically trying to verify that you've got rid of argon sodide, you're trying to get rid of the dimer, you're trying to get rid of OCl. You're doing a lot of what I call the easy part, the polyatomic reduction. And then you have the safety net built into it that says if you see 143, which is neodymium, and you see it above some threshold, which I'll say is maybe 2 to 3 times your detection limit, maybe as many as 5 times your detection limit, then we want you to flag that result and say, hey, you might want to use the in-sample approach to that. What we're doing right now is trying to calculate that new confidence bound. So I told you that we have very narrow ones for the in-sample. The +2s spread that just a little bit more. The +1s spread that just a little bit more. And what this is going to do is it's going to infer them across days. And so what it'll do is it'll spread it even more. And what we're trying to do is come up with a criteria that says to Region 10 and other regions that maybe not experience a rare earth problem, if the 143 arsenic equivalent concentration, and there's a little bit of math that takes the 143 and converts it into arsenic equivalents. If this number gets above some value, and we can back calculate it based on these distributions, then we would say you probably want to go use the appendix to estimate that if you want a good number. What we don't really have, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, is a write-up of any type of method. It's an approach really that says, the in-sample, I think, is pretty straightforward. It just changes the resolution of the instrument and tells you to monitor different ions. The math is a little different in the interference equations. There's a little bit of extra complexity in terms of tuning to check for rare earths. I don't think that's any mind-altering process. That I think Region 4 is actively doing. So I think that's a good call it data source for that information. We've run it on 8 different days on about 20 samples, some of them having matrices. It works very good, and it holds right to the numbers that we're getting out of the high res and the triple quad. It's opening the door, if you will, to this other approach where you're going to have to accept a little bit wider confidence bounds because you are predicting things, but you're not doing that day in and day out verification, that extra added QC on your workload, because if you don't have any rare earths, you don't really need to do it. but you're going to have some way of saying there's a trigger at 143, mass 143, that tells you this thing's getting pretty high, guys. You better start worrying a little bit. I'm working with the regions, and I guess the region 10, I believe it's region 5, Amanda, they're the ones that kind of set me back a little bit by saying, you know, we don't really want to make the correction if we don't have to. Or we don't want to do all the work associated with instilling a correction in the method if there's no M2 plus that are in our samples. And, you know, I can't argue with that. And at the same time, the downside is this added effort. And I'm currently working on generating this estimate, this broadest estimate, where you quarterly or some period, I would say quarterly, you'd have to determine it, and then you would predict it. And because these rare earths move together in time and they're in cross matrix and cross tune, they're well correlated. And so predicting across a number of days, we've done that with Holium. It does a very good job. We don't really see any problem with that because it's, you know, 5-6% variations. It's not that big of a deal. But we want to go verify that it's not going to get out of hand. And then, you know, putting a little bit of a caveat on that, you know, obviously that's going to generate, if you generate numbers with a distribution that's like this and your correction factor, then you're going to have to accept a little more error on the other side. And as that number becomes higher and higher and closer to your trigger value, your MCL, or whatever program you're associated with, then you got to start becoming a little more concerned about you know, this added girth of your distribution is going to influence as you get closer and closer to that MCL or whatever the value would be. To me, we are looking at collision cell, and I'm going to tell you it's probably been 2 years since I've talked to any of the manufacturers one-on-one. And the reason is we went back and said, well, we collected a lot of data that said the conventional fixed value approaches, what we call fixed factors, you determine an estimate, you use it across an entire day, across all matrices for that day, and that approach is riddled with matrix issues, drift issues. I don't know how much you guys know it, or how much you know about this kind of thing. It gets pretty involved. What happens in an ICP-MS is, let's say this is mass 140. I think this is the way you guys would think this is the higher mass. What happens is, as you run the instrument, and this is the low part, what happens is the low part has a tendency to drift down faster. And it's associated with throughput on the quad. You're using helium, and helium's kind of colliding with the lower masses and knocking them off trajectory. So what happens is, as you run the instrument during a day, typically what you'll see is that things like uranium, you'll see sometimes you see no drift at uranium, and the lighter masses will just fall and fall and fall. The problem is the correction factor is a 143 over 71.5. So this guy is falling faster and faster, and the more it falls relative to this, the more air that's induced. So on good days where drift is low, you get pretty good results. On days that drift isn't as good, you get poor results. If you run any matrix at all, it's just, well, you get like 20% errors associated with just matrix. 250 ppm sodium will produce about a 20% error on top of this drift. So we kind of looked at that and said, you know, we want to estimate better than 25%. We want to get into the sub 10 category. And I think we're well with the in sample, we're definitely sub 10%. With the +2, you're probably sub 10%. Then you start going to scantium, then you start getting to like 12 to 15%. Again, that's that spread that I'm talking about, the distributions of the corrections. So we've done a ton of work on our end, just trying to how to say this. Maybe if I back up just one more time and say, we see an enormous benefit in incorporating a collision cell based technology into a very old method. We've been using it for 20 years. So we see enormous gains in that. The problem is the use of that collision cell without some performance characteristics associated with the polyatomics like OCl, argon sodide, argon chloride, call it, etc. Uh, we see that labs really produce. They think the instrument's tuned, and it's really not. I don't know how else to put it to you. It's not optimized the way it should be. And then when you incorporate into that the idea that this +2 can generate, call it a reverse productivity. In other words, it's actually enhanced by the collision cell. Then you got to something you say, you want to optimize this polyatomic reduction, but you don't want to let this +2 drift, through the ceiling. So then you got a little bit of a balancing act on what instrument tunes will work. We want to instill that kind of thinking, that you're balancing this polyatomic reduction with this idea that, if you had a rare earth, it is drifting up. There's just no way around it. It's just the way it works. So we want to incorporate that into the thing, and into the method. So capitalize on the true collision cell capability. And then on the other side of that coin, if there is another side of the coin, we want to say, if you do experience +2 interferences, we want to use the most robust way of correcting for them. And I think we're there. It's now trying to implement them and provide what I would call some flexibility to the end user who may not have, a lot of rare earths at neodymium, samarium, and gadolinium. So that's a lot of words. And all I can say is, if you got all that, you can listen well.
Thanks, Jack. I think we're going to need to move on in our agenda pretty quickly, but I'm just curious from anybody that's on this team that's working on this from the EMC would offer up a brief comment. David or Richard or I don't know, William. I don't even remember
Yeah,
who's.
it sounds like, I mean, Jack, my thought is, given what you're saying here, is if you and maybe somebody from Region 4 or maybe Region 10 and we could have a task group meeting and go into these problems a little more detail and see, is there options that can be written into a method when you have significant levels, and significant is to be defined. Significant levels of these rare earths elements in their sample, you may have to do a certain way, or if you're up high concentrations near where they're going to interfere with accuracy of a determination, you have to do certain things, while in other cases you don't have to. Maybe there's different options can be built into the methodology. I don't know enough myself, but we have enough experts on the task group that might be able to come up with easy fixes to this that everybody can live with. So my suggestion is, if you agree with that, Jack, is we can schedule a meeting of the task group with you, and if you can tell me who's the right person in Region 4 and maybe Region 10 to invite, and we can go into the technical issues here and of how to solve them.
Oh, let me put it this way: the person Ernie in Region 4, he gets it. Everything everything he talks about on the calls, I say I concur almost 100% with. So I say, to me, I believe I have an approach that'll work for, call it the Ernie type, the people that need a result. It's more or have um, significant neodymium, gadolinium, uh, or samarium interferences. If you have that, I think Ernie would agree this is the way to go. It's this other approach that we need to hammer out, and I'd rather hammer it out with them, that being the two regions that I'm already dealing with, and then broaden the audience. And the reason is I think we really need to ground any approach in a multi-day data set. If somebody goes out and collects a single day, we've had enough experience with that. It's not really pertinent to getting a robust correction. So we're moving in that direction. I will tell you that I'm more than open to that, but I would rather close the door that we opened with the regions, or solve the problems that we've uncovered due to the regions, and then move from there. And then I think I'd be open to anyone else's suggestions at that point. So when that's going to take place, I don't know, but I can definitely email you when that happens.
But failing that, could we go ahead and send in some of the thoughts we have?
You can set. Let me put it this way. I'm one thing I am is open to comment. Um, so to me, I'm willing to read just about anything. And,
Uh,
and so to me, the only thing I will tell you is that anyway, I don't want to get into that right now. There's a fair amount of anyway. If yes, I'm willing to read anything. At the same time, I have a lot of I guess prerequisites, because I do know that there's a lot of approaches that aren't as robust as you think they are, because you haven't looked at them long enough. Anyway,
what's Ernie's last name?
Ernie Walton.
I'm sorry,
Walton.
Walton.
Yeah.
It's hard to discuss specific issues
Oh yeah.
without getting a little bit better handle on how you're proposing. I know you mentioned you have some concepts on how to deal with this. This group, this larger group, EMC group, is really not the forum to handle that kind of thing. So I'd
Right.
much rather be able to do that in a smaller group of people who are experts, who know what you're talking about better. I don't. I have an understanding, but I don't have the expertise that a lot of these people have with the technology. I'd really appreciate if you'd be willing to sit down with the working group, the task group, to look at and to go into more your concept in a little more detail.
I'm
That's
open to that. To me, David, I have sent. I believe I've sent every major manufacturer the preliminary data set that said, "Hey, these ions drift like this, and this is the problem. We're trying to address that." And that was, like I say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 years ago, where we said, "Here's the nature of the problem that's in front of us. If we want to include a +2 factor correction," and I felt as if region 4 and any place that has a geological makeup like region 4, where you're going to find some rare earths, that kind of correction was relevant. So it was just a matter of saying how to do it and how to do it robustly. So to me, I'm open to that. All I want to do is make sure that I've heard from the regions and they're happy with where we sit, and then I could open it up to whoever would want to contribute.
David, for the sake of time, I think we're going to move on. Why don't you continue to reach out to Jack and try to set up some meetings or something?
Okay.
Okay.
We're just about
All right.
out of time on this
All
call,
right.
but thank you for all your comments.
All right.
And looking forward to your presentation at NEMC this summer.
All right. Thanks.
So we are about out of time. I'd like to try to get the logo behind us. I think that's about all we're going to be able to cover. I mean, it's amazing to me. I'm not going to do it this month, but Robert has suggested maybe we expand this meeting to an hour and a half. So I think we'll set it up for an hour and a half next month, because we never really get to what I think is our most important task, which is to work through what we're going to do on this method development stuff. But we're not going to get to it this month either. So Sarah sent out some 2 more examples, and I think we've got it down to 2, and I think we just need a simple vote on which one you want. There's one that has the EMC logo, and it has a green and a blue and another green line in it with lines off to the side, and then wave lines at the bottom. And then there's a version that has the top just has the logo and the words environmental monitoring coalition, but at the bottom it has waves or hills or whatever you might want to call them, as opposed to lines. So, are there any preferences? Anybody?
So Jerry, I like the one with Jerry. This is Jordan. I like the one without the squiggly line.
I do too, but I was going to open it up for anybody else. I like the.
Yeah, I like the no
Just for your
squiggly
background,
lines better.
Who was that?
like
What
the,
did you say?
This is Mike. I said I like the one without the squiggly lines better.
Yeah. Okay. That's 3. Anybody
Same
else?
goes for Judy Morgan.
Same goes for Judy Morgan. Okay, we've got a logo. Anybody object to that? So Sarah, can you send this to me in a Word version?
sure.
Okay, thank you.
So those 3 lines look straight to me. You mean they're wiggly?
It's all noise, right? So we do
Great job.
have,
Thanks for the effort, Sarah.
yeah,
Welcome. Yeah, Christine did a lot of work on that, so thank you.
we do have 5 minutes, which is not enough time at all to get into what I wanted to be able to spend a lot of time on today, because we are going to have to spend a lot of time on it. But are there any initial comments on the letter to EPA, or especially the attachment that that someone would like to bring up, so that I could maybe have a better draft next meeting?
I have a problem in the emphasis on voluntary consensus standards bodies, at the language in here that you added. I don't think we're up to that yet until we see how it works. If we can get this effort, for example, is 200.8 moving first, and then we can reach out and we see how that works, and possibly others, before we commit to a particular way we're going to address this. We're going to work with EPA.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm at a different point where I am, and it has to do with a letter Paul Anestis wrote about 2 weeks ago. Have y'all seen that?
No.
That he talked about we need to get rid of the Environmental Protection Agency and make it the Environmental Protection Network or something. I mean, he had a completely different terminology, and talking about getting rid of the siloed EPA organization. And to me, that is the fundamental problem we have with EPA and methods, is that we have at least 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5 EPA offices developing methods in a vacuum. He says, moving from protection to prosperity, evolving the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in the next 50 years. It's published in Environmental Science and Technology. I'll email it to everyone, because I thought it was a great article. He had a big thing there. Instead of organizing by environmental media, we should be organizing by solutions-based teams matrix.
Okay. Well, I mean, I still don't think we're ready for pushing any particular solution right now.
Let me comments from others about that.
So I mean, I'm looking at the letter, Jerry. I don't see where you're pushing for a solid solution versus just sort of discussing us working with them on this. I mean, I don't see this as, I don't see why we need to hold this back at this point.
Other comments? Well, let me try to address David's concern. Were there any other significant issues? Okay, I'm not hearing anybody, so let me try to work on another draft. We will. It's 3:00. We'll meet this time next month, but for an hour and a half, and I'll work on a new draft of this letter. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Thank you. If you have any comments, send them to me, please. Okay, take care. Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
You too, Jerry.
Bye.
Thank you.